Welcome to the third day of the annual SDP Conference 2022. I'd like to start today by first congratulating my co-chair, Gary Summers. I learned today that he was selected as the winner for the 2021 Clement Kleinmutz Decision Analysis Best Paper Award for his paper, Friction and Decision Rules in Portfolio Decision Analysis, published in June of 2021. This award is given annually for the paper most worthy of recognition published in the Decision Analysis Journal for that year. So, excellent job, Gary. So, Gary, we've come to the ultimate day of the conference.
Yes, it's been a long journey to get here. And thank you, William. One great quality of you is you know how to embarrass your co-chair.
Well, it's been a fun journey, but it's also been a very fulfilling one.
Yes, when we created the conference, we thought about the speakers, topics, logistics, but the best part is something we didn't realize until now, the attendees.
Indeed. We've had a full house over the past 2 days, and they've asked a set of very keen questions. Let's not keep them waiting. Would you please introduce today's first session?
Absolutely, William. The next session is titled Gary's Grab Bag. That inauspicious name suggests the leftovers, talks that didn't fit anywhere, but it's actually the opposite. These are award-winning presentations selected by SDP and Informs Decision Analysis Society. These next two presentations are the winners of the DA Practice Award, given to the best applications of decision analysis in the past year. Additionally, we added a presentation by Intel because it too is outstanding and focused on practice. This session is about practice, practice, practice. Q&A will follow each presentation, and after the session, you can meet the speakers in the speaker breakout rooms. Our first award winner is Joyce Ribeiro, who applied DA to procurement. Joyce, the conference is excited to see your winning application.
Hello, my name is Joyce Ribeiro. I'm COO at Optimum Supply. It's a great pleasure to be here with you in this great event. I want to thank SDP for this opportunity. It was a great honor to be one of the winners of the DAS SDP Practice Award last year, and I'm going to show a bit of our project today. So I'm going to talk about Optimum Supply platform. We have a decision analysis and procurement software that supports strategic sourcing. First of all, I want to give you a bit of a situation context in procurement, in corporate procurement. So the procurement process starts with the identification of a need for purchasing an item or a service. Then the buyer runs a supplier selection and then do the order placement for the winner supplier, receive the goods, and proceeds with the payment for the elected suppliers. By far, the most strategic part of this project is the sourcing part, the supplier selection part. In the supplier selection process, we have to identify potential suppliers, then run some RFI, RFQs, the requests that we send to the supplier asking for information. Then run a result analysis, do some negotiation with the finalists, and then define the winners. So our platform supports most of this process for complex and strategic purchasing. That's a very tough part of the sourcing process. And why this is tough? Because the quality of decision-making in procurement is very critical. We are talking about high spends, very strategic contracts, and demanding and repetitive activities. Also, purchases are increasingly strategic and complex because we have many items, many variety of items, many stakeholders that needed to be involved in this decision, and also cognitive limitations that I think we are aware of, that doesn't allow us to make a good decision without some methodology to support us. In the last years, we also have a growing concern about ESG, environmental, social, and governance aspects. And companies have to be concerned about risks of image and repercussions of disasters and social repercussions about bad behavior. Also, green companies, they worth more in the stock market than the traditional ones. So it's a trend that we need to support in our software. So when you talk about decision analysis for sourcing, today there are no available tools in the market that support this complex procurement scenario that I explained. The current e-procurement softwares, they don't have enough intelligence to deal with this complex scenario for choosing the best supplier. Also, when you analyze just cost, so a net present value analysis decision is not enough to access the overall value for decisions. And some decision tools like decision tree analysis, they are not enough to model in this complex scenario because they are not good to model intangible aspects and multiple objectives decisions. So our proposal in our software is having a multi-attribute value analysis that matches these complex procurement requirements and also allows a practical routine for the corporate business approach. So to show you some of our approach and some of the results that we are obtaining with our clients, we have two applications that I'm going to share with you. The first one is from JBS. JBS is one of the largest meat providers for the world. It's a Brazilian multinational company, and they have many complex bidding process with many items involved. So one of them that I choose to show you here is a bid process for tools and abrasive materials. It was in one bid process, we bidded more than 6,800 items. We invited 7 suppliers to be a part in this bid process. And the client's main concerns were about cost, quality, and supply guarantee. Now, when you go to our SaaS web platform, we can see some of our screens here. We establish a sequence of steps that the analysts will run in our software. This step here is the step RFP, is the request for proposal. We ask the supplier for proposals, and everything is set in our platform. We have some customized spreadsheets that we can send the supplier, receive our information, and it all goes in the software. Then, for the strategic part, we can establish a value analysis, a value tree when we put the criteria that are more relevant to this decision. So when they have the concerns about cost and supply guarantee and quality guarantee, you can create this tree as you wish and put the criteria that are the most relevant and the most important for this process, and also put the weights. We also work with value functions. We have a default value function in the platform that are a linear function, and the analysts, especially the high-skilled analysts, can change this curve and can make a break here to better reflect the real interests in this decision. Okay. And when all of this is set, the analyst can run the results for result analysis in both ways, looking the overall decision and also looking for the multi-item detailed decision. Okay. Sorry. So the main performance results that it's shown comparing all the suppliers, giving the performance for each criterion that was asked in the value tree. And you can see which ones are the best in which criterion, like cost, that is purple in this chart. It's the best suppliers in cost are supplier number 2 and supplier number 5. The other ones have high costs and you can negotiate. So this chart can give the analyst some basis for negotiation. And also we have other kinds of charts that will help the decision analysis, like this one that we compare 2 by 2 the suppliers for each criterion, the one that we see the weights that were used in our value tree, and a chart that shows cost benefits for this decision. Okay. When you talk about the multi-item decision analysis, you have different scenarios that the platform creates, given the analyst forms of comparison of a combination of item and supplier. So each scenario shows some combinations of item and supplier that will best perform in this situation. So we have a minimum cost, we have the best cost benefit, you have constraints of the number of the suppliers. So if you put a constraint of just 2 suppliers, which ones are the best? So we can do this optimization using only cost or using all the criteria that were put as relevant in this bid. Okay. So now we have another application that is from BBM. BBM is one of the largest logistics operators in Brazil and in Mercosul. They are leading some work in ESG initiatives, and they are starting in our platform a way to consider ESG aspects for every strategic bid. So they run more than 50 strategic bids per year, and they are focusing on supplier development and on long-term goals for a sustainable supply chain. It's just the start of this long process. How can we do that at Optimum Supply? So we work with templates. We have a systematic way to look at the decision analysis. So our client can create some templates, and they create this value model template, and they adapt to any procurement process needs. When you talk about inserting ESG aspects in these templates, they have ESG as one of the criteria put in the value tree, and they can then choose to put some questionnaire. They do a assessment for the suppliers, asking how they do ESG in their companies, and also they can ask for very specific questions about ESG, like for a specific product, for the fabrication, for the freight. You can customize when you need to be more specific, or if you need a general governance of the supplier, and everything is set in the platform. So all the parameters are customized by the client, and you also can initiate a collaborative decision analysis involving other areas, other stakeholders that are important to this decision that needed to be communicated and to have these opinions all listed. Okay. So when they are talking about putting ESG aspects in every bid, they have, besides the other criteria that are put in the value tree, they are putting ESG in every value tree for every strategic bid. So some of the screens showing how they do that. When they create a request for the supplier, they insert a questionnaire for assessment. The supplier can assess himself, and then someone at the client can access the assessment from the supplier. Okay, and they are separated in some levels that indicate the maturity of the process for the supplier. And we can see this at the performance results. So the ESG, it's the orange bar here. So this supplier has more maturity at this process than the other two. So the main impacts and results from this approach is that we have 85% average productivity increase because we use templates to establish the decision analysis process. And when the analyst, when the user, the buyer chooses one template to do a bit, it's most of the work done, and they have a lot of productivity gain in their routine, in his routine. We also have a 42% average overall value added result at the end of our bids, comparing if you were just buying for cost, for the minimum cost. We are now monitoring the overall value of this purchase. We have also cost savings, that one of the main drivers for procurement. We have an average of 13% in cost savings. And we also got some intangible benefits like transparency, like compliance. Everything stays in the platform. Everything is available to the right person to look at. We have governance because all the steps are set, and reliability and risk reductions, and also more stakeholders engagement. Okay, we have some client testimonials here. We have a testimonial from the BM, that's the logistics operator that I presented the second case, and they reinforce that they were able to reduce time in the analysis and decision-making, and they have a greater reliability and assertiveness in this process, guaranteeing risk reductions, especially in the long term, choosing the best suppliers. JBS, from the first case that I present, they had a lot of productive gain using our software in the negotiation rounds, and that they usually took weeks to analyze our data. Now they just do everything in a few days. And we have a third client testimonial from Danone. I think you all know Danone. It's the yogurt company. So they have also time savings, especially running a lot of negotiations in the same bid, because when you ask again for the supplier for a cost reduction or to negotiate something, it's very easy through the platform. So they gain like 50% per bid in time reduction. Okay. So our technical solution for our software uses two approaches. The first one is the multi-attribute value analysis. So we have here the formula that we use for overall value of a supplier proposal, and we compare these proposals. And we also use another approach, combining the multi-attribute value analysis with a multi-item integral linear programming optimization. So we maximize the overall value for this decision, and we create the scenarios that I showed you, optimizing with different parameters. So to wrap up, our main conclusions are that we developed a very innovative procurement platform because we don't have a systematic way of doing decision analysis specific for procurement in other solutions in the market. We can combine the decision analysis methodology and all this academic and scientifically proved method for complex decisions, and optimization. They are good for dealing with multi-item bids, and you can combine these in purchasing problems. We support strategic and complex sourcing decisions, and we have significant impacts on value-added, productivity, cost savings, transparency, governance, and stakeholders' engagement. Okay. Here are some references from this work, okay? And I want to leave you with our contacts. I'm the CEO for the company. Gustavo is our commercial owner, and Kislan is our head of product development. It will be a pleasure to continue this talk with you by these channels. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, for presenting your fascinating innovation, and congratulations on your award. We have some questions for you, so I'm going to go through them in the order that they've come in. The first one is about the support from your company, and that is, how did the project start, and particularly how were executives involved and corporate culture, whether it hindered or helped the effort?
Hi, Gary. Thank you. So actually, our company was created to develop this software. So we joined some old friends and some partnerships that we evolved through, I think, the last almost 15 years. And we started developing this software, and this software turned into a company 2 years ago. So it's a bit of the opposite, and we are creating all this culture and giving our clients this culture of the decision analysis in procurement. That's a big change. We usually look at procurement as an operational area or a costs area, and we are giving value to this very important area in an organization. So I think it's our working with culture is working this with our clients and giving the strategic value analysis for them.
Thank you. So a truly entrepreneurial effort. And
yes.
That perhaps dovetails into another question, and that is how this approach has affected the communication and relationship with your suppliers. Since they're also your customers, how has it been introducing these new ideas to get customers, right? That's always a challenge for new companies.
Yes. From the supplier point of view, he uses our platform to fill the requests. So we have our client, the company that is buying, and the suppliers are filling the requests from them. The suppliers usually like that they have a professional front with the professional request, and they feel safe that they are filling some very mature questionnaire. Let's put it like this. It's not something like just by email or something that can be adulterated. So when you look at compliance, that it's a very important topic in procurement, this is a plus. We have a tough software, a reliable software that the supplier can feel safe, can rely on them. For our clients, the buyer, the company that is buying, the software helps with the analysis. So usually they have a lot of operational work, compiling all the requests from the suppliers, putting all the data together. They don't have a methodology to decide based on something. So the platform helps them to justify the best decision. So we have analytic results to justify the best results, to the best decision. And we also have an intangible aspect that can be objective because we have assessments, we have a lot of ways of transforming intangible data in tangible stuff. And so he can rely also on the solution.
You mentioned that the clients particularly like the DA process, that it makes them gain trust and feel confident in what they're doing. You also presented a whole bunch of productivity data at the end. So you almost think of the head and the heart. Do your customers or the suppliers, do they appreciate one side more than the other, or is it both combined?
Usually the staff that is buying, that is using the software, they like the productivity because it gains time for them. And they use it to do a lot of things by hand and pick up all the proposals and put everything in an Excel spreadsheet and put it all together. It's subject to a lot of errors. So this productivity part, it's very important for them, for the people that are using the software. When you're talking about a higher level, like the high management of the company, they look for the reliability and the compliancy and the safety and this trust in a holistic way. So it's like there's the technical aspects and the more intangible aspects.
Thank you. We have a question about supply chain issues, and that's the disruption in supply chains that has been going on throughout the world, and how your approach has fared when confronting these new challenges.
Yes, that's a very important question because we all faced a lot of shortages in the last 2 years with the pandemic and everything. Our software helps in 2 ways. First, to choose suppliers that are more aligned to your strategic goals. So we don't choose only suppliers by cost or by only one criterion. So we have suppliers that are more aligned, that they have a look for partnership with the client. And the other way that we are helping is changing the criteria for buying something. Before I have a lot of options in the market globally, so I can choose to buy by cost and to buy by freight time, and now I have to buy from capacity of the supplier. So I can change the criteria that I'm using to buy the same thing. So I use another model. I can adjust easily in some of our templates, and I put the criterion that are important in this moment. So we are very flexible, and this also helps in this very complicated moment.
Thank you very much. We have 2 more questions. I think we only have time for one answer, so I'm going to say them both, and you pick whichever one you'd like to answer most.
Okay.
One is maybe a more technical question. It's asked about the process of creating the value hierarchy and the objectives and weights. And the other one asks, now that you're using a new approach, what innovations may come next? Would there be a version 2, and what might be in version 2?
Okay. So I'm going to ask the technical question, and the other one, I invite you to talk to me later. Can be in the speaker room, for instance. I'm going to leave a bit of suspense. So the technical part, we have some templates that we develop and design it with the client, translating their needs in the technical aspects that they don't know because they don't study DA. So we do that in the setup of the platform. But the client, they can change a weight, for instance, or they can change a value function, like I showed you in the presentation, very easily. So it's kind of a simulation for the client. He can measure some aspects, and we let them to play with our platform, so it's easier to see, and he can run a lot of decisions in the same bid process. So he can change something, run again, another decision making, and see the results and run again. So he can feel like how the criteria responds to the weights, for instance.
Thank you very much, Joycey. So Joycey Ribeiro is a winner, the 2022 or 2021 winner of the DA Practice Award. Congratulations.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
We have a second winner as well. This is two people who work together, Sabar Bensal and Genaro Gutierrez, for their application, assessing and combining experts' judgments. So Sarab and Genaro, the conference is excited to see your winning application.
Hello and welcome. My name is Saurabh Bansal, and I'm here today to talk about a project that we worked in collaboration with the Federal Aviation Administration. My co-author and collaborator on this project is Genaro Gutierrez, who is at the University of Texas at Austin. The title of my talk is Use of Judgmental Forecast with Expert Heterogeneity to Support Biofuel Jet Fuel in a Federal Aviation Administration program. It's a lot to unpack, so I will get to all bits and pieces in a bit with you. Here is a loose outline of my talk. I'm going to talk about some contextual details first. As you know, the techniques that we use in decision analysis are specific to the context and the problems that are unique to that context. And to that end, I want to provide you with enough details to appreciate why decision analysis techniques that we use, why those were the suitable techniques to use in this context. I'll also talk about why, because of specific contextual details, the existing decision analysis techniques were not adequate for our cause, and we had to develop new decision analysis solutions for the problem at hand. Then I'll talk about two benefits of using the solution that we developed. The first benefit was how the decision-making process changed at the Federal Aviation Administration. And second, I'll try to provide quantifications in 3 dimensions of using the solution that we developed. So with that preamble, let me move on to the context of the problem. We did this project in collaboration with the ASCENT program at the Federal Aviation Administration. ASCENT, as you see on the screen, is the Aviation Sustainability Center at FAA. It has 2 objectives that I have highlighted in red. The first objective is focusing on meeting the environmental and energy needs, energy goals for the next generation air transportation system. So the keyword here for our purposes is environmental and energy goals. And the second objective is exploring ways to produce sustainable aviation fuels at commercial scale, creating an industry with large-scale economic development and job creation. From our perspective, for the scope of our project, these 2 dimensions, energy goals and trying to achieve these goals while supporting large-scale economic development and job creation, were important and relevant, as you will see. This is a massive research enterprise at the FAA. What you see on the screen on the left is a smattering of some companies that are associated with this effort. These companies are named A through D. There are a lot of companies that whose name starts with E and so on that I wasn't able to fit here. On the right side of the screen, you see a large number of academic institutions that are affiliated with this research effort. And together, the research enterprise at these private agencies as well as government agencies are helping ASCENT reach its stated goals. Our focus in this research program was to answer the following question. How can we create sustainable biofuel supply chains for alternative jet fuels? So the word jet fuel here implies to fuel that can be used for air transportation. The word alternative means that it is an alternative to the fossil fuels, and the alternative is that we look at is the biofuel that we get from biomass. Now, typically when we think of biofuel supply chains, there are 2 pathways to get biofuel from biomass, and that's what you see on the screen. From the top, where you see woody energy crops. That's the first pathway. In that pathway, you have large trees or large bushes that you can harvest, and you can put them in refineries that have the technical capability to take biomass and convert it into complex hydrocarbons or jet fuel. That's the first traditional pathway. The program at FAA was focused on a second pathway that begins at the bottom, where you see herbaceous energy crops or oilseed crops. These are crops that are not trees. They are more like small bushes that are able to grow in specific rough regional climates. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then once you have harvested that biomass, they go through the same process. You clean them out in elevators, then you put them in biorefineries, where through catalytic conversion, they eventually get into transformed into biofuels, and that can be used for air transportation. So our emphasis was on this second pathway. Now, the reason why our emphasis was on the second pathway connects back to the two parts of Ascent's objectives. The first part was just energy sustainability. And as you know, energy sustainability is a big theme, especially given in the last 2-3 years, environments of political uncertainty internationally. The federal government has made tremendous efforts to ensure that all the energy field needs can be met in-house. And this is one of the objectives. The second objective that I want to highlight, which was extremely important for FAA, was the socio-economic opportunity. Throughout the US, there is a long history of using land for various mining purposes. During the operation of these lands, typically the topsoil is removed, but once the mines are abandoned, there is not much you can do with the land. So, for example, on the screen you see a photo of a mine that has been abandoned in Pennsylvania, and it turns out that, as you can see, the topsoil has been removed. There is not much scope for vegetation, and it looks on surface that this land cannot be used for any other purpose. However, what individuals have recognized over a period of years, and research programs have tried to flourish this, is that where you can't use corn and soybean seeds as ways to earn money on depleted lands, you still are able to grow wild grasses that are native to those lands, because those grasses relatively need less nutrition to grow and flourish. And so this is the aspect of FAA that excited us, because now you have a large number of abandoned mines where you could try to grow regional grasses, harvest them to support biofuel production, and in that way, the socioeconomic development is achieved while trying to meet the local energy needs of the US market. The impact of such efforts can be pretty phenomenal. What you see on the left-hand side of the figure is a mine that was abandoned. It looked pretty rough when it was in use and when it was abandoned. However, after a mine reclamation project, what you see on the right is the same piece of land that looks like it is able to support some sort of vegetation, not commercial crops, but some sort of vegetation that can be used to grow biofuels on. The map that you see on the screen now shows you how prevalent these mine lands are. There are thousands of abandoned landmines across the US where nothing else will grow, but all these mines do provide an opportunity to grow biofuel supporting crops. So, with this background, here is what we are going to do. In this project, we said that we want to figure out how to develop better varieties of biofuel crops that provide a higher yield on depleted land. In our case, the depleted land is abandoned mine land. Now, here is a common challenge that was present in the FAA research program that was focused on developing new varieties of feedstock. As I showed you earlier, there are a large number of private entities as well as government agencies that were involved in this effort. And a lot of times, teams that were working on improving varieties of wild grasses, they were geographically dispersed. So what I've shown you here is the composition of one team where the biorefinery was based in Colorado. The techno-economic analysis, or the TE analysis, was done by a team at Tennessee, University of Tennessee, and the field trials were done at Penn State, which is in the state of Pennsylvania. So you had these three people who were dispersed geographically, trying to come together on Zoom or Skype or whatever and trying to coordinate their research effort. And a lot of times, things will shape out in an interesting manner. So for example, one of the things that these teams would actively work on was to identify which varieties they should pursue in their research funnel and which varieties they should not. And they largely did that using expert judgment, because these crops, you can't grow them in test tubes. If you try to grow them in open land, it takes a while for them to grow and mature. So you have to use your expert judgment to sort of figure out what is worth pursuing and what is not. So as an example, consider two varieties A and B that potentially can be crossbred in order to get better variety of these wild grasses. The refinery expert says that the cross of A and B will give 50 BTU per ton. The field trials expert in Pennsylvania says, well, the cross will give 35. And this number is low and therefore it's not worth pursuing. And the TEA expert, techno-economic expert says, well, the cross will give 45 BTU and it is definitely worth pursuing. So what do? You have three numbers provided by people from three different places geographically. The low-end estimate says not worth pursuing. The high-end estimate says it's certainly worth pursuing. How do you reconcile these things? So the status quo was that you will take an average of these three numbers and then you'll try to use that. Or alternately, you will just look into the team composition and see who was the most experienced expert, and people would sort of sometimes defer to that expert's judgment. But this status quo was problematic. The first issue was that when you take an average, people think that they might have more expertise, but it is not being recognized as such, that their expertise is being valued equally to a newbie's expert, so to speak. And the second item was that sometimes individuals will say that, well, someone has more expert in growing soybean, but not for camelina, and therefore we are not quite sure whether their experience directly translates into expertise. So it was clear to us that we needed a more sophisticated way of collecting expert judgments and reconciling them. And to that end, we first tried to use the standard DA prescription developed by Bates and Granger and Winkler in 1981. And their prescription is that you get these point estimates from different experts, you assign them specific weights, and then you take a weighted linear average. Well, that did not quite go as well. It did not go quite well for two reasons. The first reason was that while all these prior approaches are great for estimating or forecasting point outcomes, what we wanted to do actually was to figure out the complete uncertainty or the yield distribution that is associated with the output of biomass. And the second reason was that it was not clear to us from these papers, how do you go about assigning weights? Do you do simple weighted average, which sort of wasn't going well earlier? Or if you want to use differential weights, what's a reasonable way to come up with those weights? So we took Keeney's route of listening to managers. In Keeney's prescription, we first listen to managers and see what's going on, how are they providing their judgments, and then take the next steps. So when we started asking managers about what estimate are they giving, we realized that because typically they would give an estimate that mattered most to them, they were giving different things. So for example, the refinery expert was worried what will be the financial feasibility of the refinery if the yield is not particularly high. So they were quite hung up on the low end side of the yield distribution, and that was the estimate that they would give. The field trial, on the other hand, they are R&D people. They're excited about new varieties. So they really wanted to see the best potential of a new crop, and that's why they would sometimes give the upside estimate. While the techno-economic experts, they are cash flow people, and they are used to looking at averages. So they'll try to give us average experts. So that was a revelation that actually different experts could be giving us different points on the distribution, so to speak. And we also realized as we talked to them was that they recognized that there was a need to estimate the complete distribution, even though we were just asking for point estimates, or they were willing to give only a point estimate. So to address all these things, we needed a new development. Here is our development. Our development had 3 steps. First, we tried to calibrate judgments of these 3 experts, and I'm going to talk about these 3 experts as a way to illustrate what we did. What we'll do is we will try to identify which quantile is each expert providing and what is the variability in that quantile judgment. Second, we will try to take this information and put it into an optimization model to reduce the weights that we should be putting on their judgments in order to estimate mean standard deviation or specific quantile. And then third, once we have obtained these weights, we can start using those weights on their future judgments. So let me walk you through each of these steps one at a time. For calibration, here is what we did. There were a few hybrids that the research program had grown a few times just to develop its own expertise. So we used this set of distribution as a calibration distributions. For all these distributions, we went to each expert and said, could you please provide us with your estimate for the BTU yield of this particular class? So for example, if you look at the second column on the screen, you have a prediction by expert 1 for hybrids 1 through 14. Then you have a prediction for expert 2 in the third column, prediction for expert 3, and so on. What we were able to do then was to say, all right, assuming that you're consistently providing us the same thing, either the average or the low side or the upside from your vantage point, we are going to use this distribution to figure out what quantiles you're providing us. The way we did that was to see that when the first expert, for example, provides us with an estimate of 9.7, what does the historical yield data for that variety say? It turns out that the historical yield data said that the mean was 11 and the standard deviation was 2.77. So we could then locate where 9.7 is situated on a mean of 11 and standard deviation of 2.77 and so on. So overall, what we were able to do was to say, all right, what is the standardized z-score of the expert 1 for a particular judgment? And we were able to plot all the histograms for their judgments. Loosely speaking, we converted their judgments into standardized z-scores for location scale distributions that previous research has shown are relevant to this domain. And in doing that, we were able to identify the distribution of the judgments in a standardized way of each expert. So that's what you see on the screen, standardized judgments of individual expert. So this is the outcome of the calibration exercise. Once we have done this calibration, we can easily figure out on average what is the quantile that each expert is providing, or the average z-score that each expert is providing, and the variability in the z-scores. And then we can put in all this information into an optimization model. The optimization model that you see on the screen is as follows. We seek to estimate for any new distribution a linear combination of the mean and standard deviation. Alpha 1 represents the weight on the mean, and alpha 2 represents the weight on the standard deviation. The reason why we chose this format is that when we are trying to estimate the mean, we can stick in alpha 2 is equal to 0. When we are trying to estimate standard deviation, we can stick in alpha 1 is equal to 0. When we are trying to obtain a specific quantile, then we can choose alpha 1 and alpha 2 values appropriately, and that will give us estimates of specific values of quantiles. And the way we want to estimate this combination of mu and sigma, mean and standard deviation, is by using all the judgments that we have from the experts. Now, we had the technical development that we have in the paper. It is published in Operations Research, and we are happy to provide a copy of that. But one of our significant technical results was that if you have calibrated your experts in this manner, and the distribution that you're trying to estimate is a location scale distribution, then it turns out that a linear aggregation model is really the optimal way to aggregate judgments. It's not a matter of convenience anymore. Technically, statistically, that is the best way to aggregate the judgments. And the optimization problem eventually that it boils down to is a generalized least squares problem that you see at the bottom of the screen. We are trying to minimize the square deviations between what the expert has said in the past and what has happened and what has actually happened. And I would note that the prior discussion in the literature in Bates and Granger and Winkler turns out to be special cases of our development once we provide this lens. The solution of this problem is standard to the literature of statistics and econometrics. The formula that you see at the bottom that provides you with the optimal set of weights that individuals should be using for processing expert judgments. Let me walk you through some of these things quickly. The matrix AT in the bottom of the screen, it just represents alpha 1 and alpha 2, the weights you wanted to assign on mean and standard deviation, whether you're estimating the mean, standard deviation, or a combination. In the center, you see the Z matrix that simply corresponds to what average Z scores are for each expert. The sigma matrix that you see in the center, that is the variance covariance matrix of the Z scores that we estimated during the calibration exercise. But all these weights, you can estimate them in Excel, you can estimate them in MATLAB, in any statistical estimation software, they are easily estimated. Now, once we have these weights, we can start using those on the future judgments. We also had some analytical results that, let me go through them somewhat quickly. One of the interesting things that kept coming up in our development was that the money to explore new varieties was rather tight. And there was always this tension between how much money should we be spending in getting more experts on board, because that means that we will have less money to do R&D, actual R&D in terms of field development. So one of the results of our development is that we can quantify the informative information contained in an expert's judgments in terms of a sample size. Or we can start answering the question, either I can collect 15 data points or I can pay this expert this much money. What is better? We are able to provide that quantification. We are also able to quantify the contribution of each expert while they are while their judgments are being aggregated with 3 or 4 other experts in a team to come up with a composite estimate of the mean and standard deviation. The last item that we are able to do, and I won't go into a lot of detail, is that our technical development is consistent with Bayesian Framework, in which the expert calibration provides you with the prior information for the mean or standard deviation of a yield distribution. And as you have more data coming in from field experiments, you can use those data to update the estimates of mean, standard deviation, and other metrics that you want to estimate. So let me talk about the benefits of using our approach at the research program. The first benefit was that based on our recommendations and the knowledge creation during the project, FA changed the way this research program was being run. Specifically, before this project, the practice was that there was a web-based tool that all the experts were using to provide their estimates for new varieties. That would remain the same. So essentially, the way of collecting the information remained the same, which was useful because it allowed us to focus on processing their judgments in a different manner. Earlier, in the second dimension, we were not quite sure what experts were providing. In fact, different experts did not recognize themselves that somebody else was providing the low-end estimate, somebody else was providing the average, and so on. But now we are able to say that, look, it didn't matter what you are providing us, whether you're providing low-end estimates, median, mode, as long as whatever you are giving us, it's consistent, we can use that and we can calibrate your judgments and we can follow up with you and say that, hey, it looks like on average you have been providing us with the 50th quantile or the 45th quantile or the 70th quantile or the 20th quantile. So now there is a better clarity on what each expert is providing. And on the third dimension, how are judgments reconciled? Earlier, the status quo was that either an average was being taken or the most experienced or most convincing person's voice was being heard more. But now we have a formal process of saying that, look, we are going to assign weights, but those weights will be proportional to what is it that we are trying to estimate, mean, standard deviation, or a quantile, but also it's based on how consistent and reliable an expert's judgments have been in the past. So this is the way the process has evolved. In terms of quantified benefits, there are 3 benefits. First, selection decisions have become better. We are able to quantify some of those things. There is a greater sense of fairness on treating judgments. Individuals now feel that regardless of their station in the team, if their judgments are of a better quality, then they are getting more weight than before. And the last item is that it has also revealed how budget allocations or budget availability might be interacting with the benefit of expert elicitation. So specifically, the first benefit that I want to talk about is that we did a comparison between what was the best way to collect and reconcile judgments that was reported in the literature in Anil Gaba's paper in 2019 versus our method. And it turns out that the overall quality of estimating mean, standard deviation, and quantiles has dramatically improved. And and the selection decisions, go, no-go decisions, have become better. Overall, we were able to identify 22% better selection of projects. This 22 number is composite of reducing false negatives as well as reducing false positives. The second benefit that we found was that the shape of the funnel, research funnel, determines the benefit of using expert judgment. What you see on the screen shows this benefit in a visual manner. On the x-axis is the fraction of projects that you want to select, projects or particular varieties that you want to shortlist for a future development. And on the y-axis is the value of using our approach. Specifically, our method shows that if you want to select just a small fraction of projects or opportunities, then trying to improve expert judgment is not going to be particularly useful. And the intuition is that when you're only selected in the top 5 or 10% projects, they stand out by themselves, even when the expert judgments have a little bit of noise. So you really don't need to spend a lot of time and energy in improving expert judgment there. On the other hand, if you're going to accept 90% of the projects, then it means that last 10% of the projects or opportunities, they are so bad that they're going to stand out by themselves too. So there is no need to improve expert judgment there. But when you start saying that I want to select top 50% of the projects or 40% of the projects, that's where improving expert judgment becomes really valuable in terms of return on investment on these efforts. And the last item is that it provided us a lot of insights into what were experts thinking. It unpacked the expert thought process for us. It revealed that different decision makers cared about different metrics, and they were giving us different judgments, but they had not articulated that bit before. It provided us with a quantification of how much information was contained in each one of the judgments that were provided to us, and it provided us with a sense that the weight assigned to each person's judgment is now a function of how well they have performed in the past and not necessarily based on their credentials alone. In terms of looking at it from an academic research enterprise, it provided us with a complete basis for a complete circle. We have a technical article based on the technical development in operations research. We have developed a teaching case based on this effort. And we have also written a practitioner's article that is about to appear in IJA. What you see at the bottom are some quotations that we collected from farmers and other individuals involved in this effort. We feel that there is a process in place now. Earlier, we were doing things in an ad hoc manner. We are doing things in a consistent manner. I don't need to be the loudest person in the room now. The quality of my judgments speak for themselves. And the last item was, and it touches the socio-economic aspect of the SN project, is if we can help make West Virginia farmers, where a lot of these mines that where Penn State was focused on, if we can make West Virginia farmers make $200 more per acre, that's great. And really, for the demographics that we are looking at in West Virginia, $200 per acre is a good deal of money for rural individuals. So let me conclude by saying that this was an opportunity that had contextually rich details. The size of the problem was interesting. The scope of the problem was interesting. It looked at different disciplines. It looked at biorefineries, socioeconomic aspects, decision analysis. And so it was a very interesting project to work on. There was a need to develop a solution that individuals from these different domains will be able to understand. And our decision analysis approach sought to strike that balance between rigor as well as clarity. The project had proven impact with identified sources of benefits, both on the quantitative side, but also on the qualitative side. And finally, we had a technical development and a contribution towards theory as well as pedagogical materials. I'm happy to answer any questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Saurabh and Hirano, for presenting a fascinating innovation. We have time for only one question. I'll read two questions. You can decide whichever one you wish to answer. Saurabh and Hirano will be in the speaker breakout rooms, so everybody will have an opportunity to ask them more questions at that time. So we have a general question and a very technical question. The general question is, what is it like to develop this innovation? Did you go straight to that solution, or was it a process of unexpected twists and turns? The technical question is, when you asked the experts to estimate yields, did you facilitate the elicitation, for example, using debiasing techniques? And if so, how much did the facilitation affect the distribution of the z-scores that you obtained from the experts?
So let me answer the first one. I know Hinaro has to run. Hinaro, do you want to answer? Okay. So this is the second paper that we have written on expert elicitation in the context of yield determination. And the first project that we had worked on, it was with Dow AgroSciences. It was in the commercial division, where the managers had a PhD in plant biology, statistical sciences. And what we realized there was that we could ask managers judgments for specific quantiles and then could calibrate those judgments. But when we try to use the same technique here with FAA managers as well as farmers and refinery owners, it turns out that mathematically the same set of toolkit just was not viable for us. So we kept thinking about how can we use the same general idea that we can calibrate experts' judgments to figure out what quantile they are giving us when they are willing to give us only 1 point estimate. And we went back and forth, and it was after a while we realized that we don't need to ask them for a specific quantile. We can just ask them to give us a consistent estimate. And they have specific roles in their enterprises. They are used to providing forecast. So instead of asking them for a quantile, we just said, please give us your forecast for this specific role that you have in the organization. And once we figured out that that's what we need to do, then rest of the stuff was a little more easier for us, because while the mathematics is interesting, it leverages some of the GLS framework, because some of it is novel. The trick was to figure out how to make that math talk to what forecast managers are willing to give. So in that sense, it was really nice to figure out that we can use the same sort of mathematical development in a different context and still be able to get something of use. I forget the second question that you had said was...
That's okay. We would love to hear the answer, but we'll have to save it for the speaker breakout room, because we do have another a presentation coming up. But I would like to say, Saurabh Bansal and Hinaro Gutierrez, congratulations for winning the 2021 DA Practice Award.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more presentation for you this session. Jordan Steffens and Jennifer Harrington will describe Intel's framework for making quality decisions. Jordan and Jennifer, we look forward to learning from you.
Hello and welcome. My name is Jennifer Harrington, and I am joined by my colleague Jordan Stevens. We are both from Intel and part of a team of decision professionals in Intel's Center for Decision Leadership. This session that we're going to be delivering today is called The Upside of Decision Analysis. And for this talk, we will be introducing you to the upside framework that our team developed and show you how it has helped to define and organize all the major elements of a high-quality decision analysis within our company. Now, before we jump into the framework, let me give you a little background. Our team has trained thousands of Intel employees in decision quality and decision analysis throughout the years, which you can see from some of the class pictures that are shown here. And there are a diverse group of people from all across the company, engineers, analysts, executives, just to name a few that come through our courses. Some will be consumers of the output from a decision analysis. Some will be participants in the activities that are required for a decision analysis. And some will be the practitioners conducting the decision analysis itself. And because of this, there are different needs. And one of the challenges that we face is figuring out how to make decision analysis memorable, scalable, and practical for all three of these groups, but especially for the practitioners. But let's tell you what we mean when we say decision analysis. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. It's probably worth just a quick discussion of what decision analysis means in this context, because some of you may be using a broader definition. When we say decision analysis, when it relates to upside, and the framework we'll be walking through today, we're talking specifically about the evaluation phase of a decision process. So here we're showing a dialogue decision process or a version of that process. And what we're really doing with upside is dealing with what happens in this evaluation phase of a decision process. So going back to that large number of people that we've trained, of those, say, thousands of people that we've trained, hundreds of those have actually received from us further training on conducting decision analysis specifically. And as we've trained those people and they've gone back into their jobs and tried to apply what they've learned, we found some challenges that people have run into. There are kind of a couple of groups of people. So some of them, when they're back at their desks, feel like they're stuck in neutral. So they go back to their desk, but they're unsure of where to start or what to do first. And so they kind of sit with inaction on applying what they've learned, and it becomes stale and lost over time. There's another group of people on maybe the opposite end of the spectrum that really want to jump in and get moving, and they jump to a high gear really quickly, and going so quickly that they miss a lot of important fundamentals. And sort of the equivalent of if you've driven a stick shift, wanting to go to fifth gear immediately, it just doesn't work. But that's what we saw some group of people, trying to do and struggling. On top of that, there are some just general challenges people deal with when they're trying to apply decision analysis back on the job. As we would teach our courses, we would ask people to share what we called their kind of worst modeling disaster that they've ever had, or worst analysis disaster they've ever had. And through them sharing those experiences, we identified a set of things that were common challenges people ran into in trying to apply decision analysis. We came to call those, kind of riffing off of a popular commercial, the drivers of modeling mayhem. And we had a list of 6 or 7 things that were common factors that caused people really to struggle with analysis or to fail. And so we wanted to develop something that would help both of these groups, those that are stuck in neutral, those that are kind of trying to go into a high gear too quickly, and then, everyone in dealing with some of those drivers of modeling mayhem. We wanted to come up with something that would help them to be able to overcome those challenges.
And so keeping these factors in mind and wanting to help people address the challenges that they were seeing through their modeling mayhem, it eventually led us to create the Upside Decision Analysis Framework. And as we thought through and planned out our development efforts, we knew that we had to make the framework first memorable so that it was easy to recall, not only for learning, but also the application of DA. It had to be practical in that the key components that you typically find in a DA is laid out in a clear fashion and in an order that makes sense. And then lastly, it had to be scalable so that even if our team was not directly involved, that it could be helpful to other practitioners. And so here is the Upside Framework with the efforts that we, resulted from what we were doing. And it helps to define and organize all those major elements of a high quality decision analysis. Now, as you can see, UPSIDE is an acronym where U stands for understand the context, P is to prepare an initial decision model, S is searching for key uncertainties, I incorporate the impact of probability, D discover a better strategy, and E explain what we've learned. Under each of these letters is a column that is the next click down in terms of what we mean. And that's what Jordan and I will spend the remaining of our time today in walking you through those details and how it enables a high quality decision analysis. So let's jump into it, starting with you. With you, it's in understanding the context, we would want to review the frame and alternatives and identify the questions to be answered by the analysis. And how Upside helps us here is that it builds on the frame and alternatives that have already been defined prior by prompting us to consider what we need to learn from the analysis. So often we see people want to just dive into the analysis right away with little or no time spent on framing and alternatives, or even thinking about what they want to find out from the analysis. And what Upside encourages is to take that step back and think about the questions the decision maker wants answered. And then given that, thinking about how we should structure the analysis in order to answer those questions and provide insights.
So P in Upside stands for preparing an initial decision model. So this includes both planning the model and then gathering the inputs and creating a model that's consistent with our plan. So getting more specific about what that means. So we found that many analysts, when they would get back to their desks and they wanted to jump in and start modeling right away, they would immediately start into building the model without much planning, and that many of the challenges that they would face would be a result of not having spent time in deliberately thinking through the right structure and the right level of complexity, et cetera. So within Upside, we actually start with and emphasize using influence diagrams, which many of you will be familiar with, to plan the structure of the model and make deliberate choices early on about what the model will include, not include, how the model will be, how the model will be structured to help us answer those questions that Jen was talking about. And then consistent with that model, or consistent with that influence diagram, we'll build a model that includes, our strategy table of decision variables, but also inputs from subject matter experts, initial inputs from subject matter experts. And within Upside, we stress that those initial inputs should be the result of some, relatively quick thought from the subject matter experts, because we don't know yet which uncertainties are the most important. And then we build a model that'll help us, calculate the value that we're trying to measure and help us get insight and clarity to answer those questions that, again, Jen mentioned.
Okay, next up is S. And in S, in searching for key uncertainties, we conduct a deterministic, also often called a base case analysis, and that can help identify those uncertainties that may warrant further discussion. So let's talk a little bit about how Upside can help us with that. What the framework can do is remind us to do just that, is to use deterministic analysis to understand the value drivers by building a base case waterfall for each alternative. And then also for finding out what the critical uncertainties are that have the biggest impact on the value by looking at a base case tornado. Now, another side benefit with doing deterministic analysis, besides these two reasons, is we often find that analysts will immediately want to go to the probabilistic analysis rather than investigating how the model works. And so another side benefit with deterministic analysis is it helps us aid in the debugging of a model. Oftentimes you're building a model, and once you get into probabilistic analysis, it gets to be very difficult to figure out if there's something that might be logically incorrect with your model. And so deterministic analysis can help that with that as well.
Okay, and then building on that deterministic analysis, we move on to I, which stands for incorporate the impact of probability. So this is where we do our probabilistic analysis and take uncertainty and probability more fully into account. And we deliberately made this the fourth part of Upside because one thing we found is that analysts that we were training fell in love with probabilistic analysis and wanted to jump to that immediately. And we found that when they did that, to Jen's point, they would miss a lot of opportunity to understand how their model was really working and understand what was really important. So after you've gone through that deterministic analysis here, this is where we conduct some in-depth assessments of the key uncertainties in the model and then do some probabilistic analysis. So let's talk about what we mean by that a little bit more. So we talked about this assessment of in-depth assessment of key uncertainties. We use a structured process that we, in a simple way, show here. A lot of you probably use a similar process in terms of doing these in-depth assessments, and we save that for really the most important or critical uncertainties in the model. And we found that by calling this out and making it clear that this is for key uncertainties, we avoid people getting swamped. One thing we found was that a lot of analysts would want to do this level of rigor and detail on every uncertainty in their model and would really be overwhelmed by that, and they would overwhelm their experts by that. So we say, in Upside, this is where we really focus in on the few key ones that need this level of rigor. And then based on that insight we get from those in-depth assessments and the structure we have in our model, we then conduct some deterministic or some probabilistic analysis. And we use a couple of different tools. So we use Monte Carlo analysis and/or decision trees, depending on the situation. But we use those to help us get insight into what the different drivers of value are and the different alternatives, the kind of range of possible outcomes we might have, and understanding where the value lies as we go down different paths, which then leads us into really the next step that Jen will talk about.
Okay, thanks, Jordan. So yes, the next step is discovering a better strategy. And in discovering a better strategy, we often brainstorm what we call a hybrid alternative. And then we gather the information needed to evaluate the new alternative with the model and update the analysis. So let's see how that can work in this step. So we often find that as you're going through a decision analysis, people often will have an initial set of alternatives that they evaluate, and they'll get an NPV, or expected value that they'll compare, and then they'll stop there. But we tend to think that that's incomplete because majority of the time, there's going to be a better alternative, and it's just waiting to be uncovered, where that alternative is better than any of the initial set of alternatives that was evaluated. And so what we're showing here is an example using a flying bar chart, which some of you might be recognized. The first 6 alternatives were part of the initial set. They came out of the alternatives phase. And then it was only after we evaluated them and through us prompting potentially a project team to think about hybrids that the bottom one emerged. And as you can see, that bottom one has a higher expected value and potentially is a combination of the best of 2 alternatives from the top. And so that's where we see the additional value of looking through hybrids and then being able to then go and update your model with additional information.
And I think with Upside making this piece about discovering a better strategy, its own kind of column within Upside, has been really helpful to help people understand that ultimately the goal here is to create more value than any of those initial kind of set of alternatives that you talked about, Jen. And I think we saw that people often would kind of run a probabilistic analysis on the initial set and just feel like they were done. And so we wanted to place some emphasis on this. Another place we wanted to place some emphasis that we found people were not really giving enough time to was this next piece around the last piece of Upside, which has to do with explaining what we've learned. I'm sorry, Jen, I jumped ahead of you there a little bit.
That's okay. But I can cover this.
Yeah, go ahead and cover this. I jumped ahead of you a little bit.
Yep. Okay. So the one thing Jordan and I, as we were talking to this, we wanted to mention is oftentimes kind of piggyback on what Jordan said. Sometimes when you're focusing on trying to discover a better strategy, you find that you might actually have to circle back to prior activities in the framework when gathering this new information, right? You may learn something new that requires you to say, revisit and open up the frame. Or it might prompt us to come up with new questions that we want the analysis to answer, which in turn could change the structure of the model and so on, right? And so what we wanted to highlight here is that's actually quite okay. And in fact, we would say that because Upside is not necessarily a linear flow, despite it being shown this way. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Jordan to describe the last letter.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to...
That's okay.
Didn't mean to steal your thunder on that part, because that is critical. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So E is if we're explaining what we've learned. And again, this is a part that we found people were not really giving enough time to. In addition to looking for those hybrids, once they had some insights out of their analysis, people immediately wanted to jump into just kind of showing some charts and not necessarily giving enough time to thinking about how we're going to convey the results of the analysis, how we're going to convey the insights that we've gathered. And so we made this a focus within Upside. So one of the biggest challenges that we see in our case is that not only are we dealing with probabilistic analysis, which can be a little bit challenging sometimes to explain, we're often trying to convey that to people who are used to deterministic answers. So on the left-hand side is a cumulative probability chart, but you have cumulative probability distribution, but the results of our analysis is typically a range of potential outcomes with a lot of underlying things happening probabilistically. And people that we're talking to, executives, people on the project team, are used to getting deterministic answers. The answer's 42.3, and here are the specific set of assumptions that lead you to 42.3. So we deliberately devoted an entire column here in Upside, an entire letter in Upside, to spending time thinking about how we're going to convey what we've learned, making it as clear as possible. What we found is that you can do the best decision analysis in the world, but if you can't explain it and you can't convey the insights in a way that makes sense to people or that they can get their heads around, it really won't provide the same value. And we found that on some really high profile kind of projects recently with very senior executives that all that time we spent in thinking about how to convey what we've learned has been time well spent, and we want to make sure people are budgeting time to do that. So as we think about Upside, as we've had a couple of years of living with this Upside framework and using it in our teaching and in our practice and letting other people have an opportunity to utilize this. There are a couple of learnings that we've had and some real surprises for us. So we've initially developed this to help practitioners be able to go do decision analysis. And we feel like that's been really successful in terms of using that as a structure for teaching, for people to have back at their desk to guide their work. What's been a bit of a surprise is that it's been really helpful as a communication tool for us with decision makers, with stakeholders in a decision. So as we move into an evaluation phase within a decision process, we'll sit down with the executives and spend time talking about the process that we're going to use there, the kind of steps that are involved. So it becomes a way to explain where that's headed, which otherwise could be a little bit of a black hole to them, but also as a way to talk about where we are in that process and what sort of activities we're undertaking and how those fit into the overall picture and where we're headed. So that's been really, really useful. Another piece that we were a little bit worried about is we recognize that every decision is different and that you really need to fit the decision process and the approach you take analytically to the decision that you're facing. And we worried that this would become a rigid checklist, that people would say, no matter the decision I'm on, I have to check every box in this. And instead, what we've been pleased with is it's operated more as a flexible planning tool, that it operates a little bit more like a safety checklist, maybe that airlines use or something like that, where it's an opportunity for us to make sure we don't miss things that are critical. And if we're not doing things that we're deliberately not doing those, or if we're skipping around, we're doing that deliberately versus just forgetting about those things and skipping over them and not doing certain activities just because we forgot. So it's been really helpful in that way as a checklist. And I think another maybe surprise is that as much as this has provided value, we think, to others that have been able to learn Upside and go apply this as they're working through decision analysis, it's something that our team has used consistently and heavily as we've worked on a number of projects to help guide our work and to help us, even though we're practitioners that are training other people and have a lot of experience in this. It can be helpful for us in helping us not, sometimes under the time pressure of the moment, not forget about certain principles or activities that are really important and could add a lot of value as we're moving toward getting clarity for our decision makers on what the best choice is. And so we're excited about where Upside, what it's done for us, but also where it's headed. And we plan to continue to work on this and refine it and proliferate it. We're excited about the value we think it can help create and unlock at our own company, but also even beyond that now as we begin to share that with all of you. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time and your question, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jordan and Jennifer, for a fabulous presentation. We have a whole bunch of questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And of course, you will be in the speaker breakout room later, so we'll have an opportunity for more questions. The first two questions are kind of the opposite side of the same coin. So I'll read both of them and then we'll get what you think. So thinking about modeling, does Intel have a guide for structuring a model? Chevron had such a guide, which enables many people to pick up a model and generally understand how it's organized. So a guide, maybe templates, perhaps that's not the right word, but something to help people. And then another question asked, if modelers focus on a deterministic or base case, would that bias them towards making the ranges less thoughtful? Maybe they mean more about judgments, but again, a template could also bias as well as support.
Jen, do you want to tackle the first part about the kind of template question?
Sure.
I can't handle the second part.
Yeah. So thank you for the question, Gary. We will encourage, if anything, actually, we require, if you're building a decision model, to start with our template, but we use the template word very loosely. It's a template in that it's got some of the formatting that will set up a decision analysis, right, in order to run a Monte Carlo simulation, for example. But outside of that, it's actually kind of a blank canvas as well. And I think, we're of the mind that we don't, and this might go to the second part of the question, which Jordan will probably answer, but, every decision is different. And so while there are some basic principles in kind of guiding, best known methods that we would encourage people to use, and that's why we do have a template for people to start in, it largely is still a blank canvas in order to fit that decision for that specific situation. Jordan, feel free to add anything as well.
I think the only thing I would add is we do, as we teach and practice decision analysis, we do have, like you said, best practices and standards that we look at, so that, we do talk about modeling as a team sport rather than an individual sport. And that, every time you build a model, you have to keep in mind that other people are going to need to use that model. And and so we do have ways and approaches that we use to try to make that, make our models as transparent as we can and easy for someone else to pick up and use. So on the second question about deterministic analysis, it might be a bit of a terminology issue maybe. So when we talk about deterministic analysis and building that initial model, we actually do have ranges and probabilities in that model. And when we think about like a deterministic or base case, what we might call a base case tornado diagram, you are looking at, in that case, what if this variable is at its high versus if this variable is at its low? What's the, potential impact? We would still call that deterministic analysis, because you're kind of looking at sort of one case at a time and looking at the impact of those different uncertainties. What we found is that people would skip over that, and then they would just start running their model, running Monte Carlo analysis or things like that, where kind of everything was changing at once. And it was really easy for people to kind of not understand if their model was even working correctly, or to understand, whether, kind of to be able to explain actually what was coming out of their model. So it's really just building toward the probabilistic analysis, but doing it in a way that helps people, be able to isolate specific things and make sure that things are working the way that they're supposed to, and have some idea of what's important to then drill into more as you get into more of those in-depth probability assessments.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. I'm going to try to combine three of them together, but also remind people that we do have the breakout rooms coming up. So one question is, do you find the framework being adopted to different extents based on managers' training and competence and comfort? So I'll add to that, having trained thousands of people, is it possible to create a situation where decision analysis becomes just spread organically, bottom up in a self-sustainable way? So many people know it that they just start using it. Or does it require a push from the company to get people to use it? And that dovetails into another question, and that is, there may be the effect of the culture on what you're doing, but there may be also the effect of what you're doing on the culture. So perhaps you could try to, in 1 minute or two, synthesize all that together and share your thoughts with us.
Well, that's what, maybe I'll start first, but that's probably a benefit of having co-presenters. So, I think in general, we are for the most part a grassroots approach. We don't mandate DQ or DA at Intel. If anything, we found that the strategy of the grassroots has really kind of helped proliferate it. But at the same time, there are pockets. Obviously, our company is very large, right? And I think we've seen that it picks up in certain areas versus others. And so that's often why we say this takes time, right? And so, in terms of the specific usage of it and the framework here in general is, one of the things we were seeing is people were picking and choosing what they like best about a DA. And I think a lot of us as decision professionals know that the power and the value of it comes from the full process. And so that's really one of those reasons why we decided to develop Upside. Now, Upside is fairly new. It's been around, I think, Jordan, maybe a couple of years. And so, even getting people to adopt that, I think in general, it's encouraging. But, time will see in terms of, how well the adoption of it. But it is something that I think is better than what we've seen previously in terms of DA at Intel.
Jordan, would you like to add any comments?
No, I think we can take any other comments in the breakout. I think Jenna did a great job.
Thank you, Jordan and Jennifer, very much. A wonderful presentation. I have just a few announcements before we go to the breakout rooms. So first, Meet the Speaker breakout rooms last for 15 minutes, but you and the speakers are welcome to stay in the Meet the Speaker room as long as you wish. Second, after the Meet the Speaker rooms, we have a 30-minute conference break. We're returning again at 10:15 West Coast time. That's 1:15 p.m. So 10:15 a.m. on the West Coast, 1:15 p.m. on the East Coast. Third, during the break, Dave Matheson will be in a Zoom room meeting people who are interested in SDP's new Innovation SIG. So if you're interested, please join Dave in the Zoom room. I believe you have a link for it on the conference hub that you're looking at. So in sum, if you wish to, please go to the Meet the Speaker rooms and meet this session's speakers, then visit Dave and learn about the Innovation SIG. And however you spend your time, please come back here at 10:15 a.m. on the West Coast, 1:15 p.m. on the East Coast for our next session. Enjoy the break. Thank you.